Non-government organizations. The International Peace Bureau devoted energies to convince nations to reduce military spending and nuclear disarming. Also, the International Committee of the Red Cross responds to human needs in countries where war is raging, natural disasters, and where civilians have no food or water. Events that led to the formation of these organizations started with the Napoleonic Wars, 1794 to 1814. It led to push for peace reforms, and it was one of the first steps in a global want for peace. The Peace Congress within Europe between 1848 and 1853. The people in it were Paris, London, Rome, Bern, Chicago, and Antwerp. All were pushing for peace, and it was a great period of peace ideals spreading among the nations. The Third Universal Peace Congress, Rome in 1891. Frederick Balger, first founder/president, and the IPB founded as a result of this conference. The Battle of Solferino, June 24th, 1859. Henry Dunnet helped wounded soldiers and lobbied political leaders to take more action to protect war victims. The First Geneva Convention, August 1864. The First Geneva Convention put a legal framework on medical decisions. It was compulsory for armies to care for all armies, and for all to care for the wounded, no matter the side. And finally, the Four Geneva Conventions of 1949, International Red Cross Conference in Stockholm. It protects all. It included the treatment of POWs, wounded and sick in war, shipwrecked soldiers, and civilians and non-soldiers.
The Universal Declaration of Human Rights is such an important document within our history, and what it does, pretty much, is it outlines the rights and freedom of anybody entitled to it, so everybody that is in the UN, which is most of the world. So let's go back to the Treaty of Paris of 1763. So pretty much, at the time, France owned a lot of North America, and so what this treaty did is it ended the 7 Years' War, and it entitled Britain to, come into North America and start colonizing it for themselves, which eventually led to the Intolerable Acts of 1774. So what these acts imposed on the colonists is, give some context. Britain was really poor at the time; they were in a lot of debt, and so they needed money really bad. So they started to tax the colonists, and so the Quartering Act and the Tea Act, and so all those were going on, which was the Intolerable Acts of 1774, and that in itself eventually led to the Declaration of Independence. The colonists were sick of all these taxes, and they wanted their own freedom, and they wanted to become a people, and so they rebelled against Britain, and they wrote this document of what they want. And so that heavily inspired the Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen. So the American Revolution also, inspired the French Revolution, and with the French Revolution came the Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen. And so after that, that also had caused the Franco-Russian alliance. So all of these documents were really important. They all heavily inspired each other. So the Franco-Russian alliance, the point of the Franco-Russian alliance was pretty much it ended the diplomatic isolation of France, and it ultimately undermined the supremacy of the German Empire in Europe at the time. And so after that was, World War I and the League of Nations, of course. And so the Treaty of Versailles was made in order to, rectify the peace and, maintain peace between all these countries and form an alliance of their own. And so after that, it was the fall of the League of Nations in World War II, which eventually led to the United Nations, and where the United Nations created the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So things like this, and all these violent acts don't happen again. So that's why the Universal Declaration of Human Rights is such an important document within our history.
International Court of Justice. The International Court of Justice settles disputes when international law is applicable. An example of this is when the International Court of Justice operated regarding international border in Gulf of Maine between the United States of America and Canada. It gives advisory opinions on international legal issues. The members are 5 permanent members, which are France, China, USSR, UK, and the United States. Events that led to the formation of the International Court of Justice started with the Jay's Treaty in 1794. It was an advert war between the United States and Britain, and the Treaty of Amity, Commerce, and Navigation. It promoted arbitration. The Treaty of Washington in 1871 was also between the UK and the United States. It set forth rules governing duties of neutral governance and applied by the tribunal to consist of 5 members: the United States, the UK, Brazil, Italy, and Switzerland. The Alabama Claims Arbitration in 1872. The Alabama Claims agreed to submit to arbitration claims from breaches of neutrality from the Civil War in America. It served to demonstrate effectiveness of arbitration in settling a major dispute. The Hague Peace Conference of 1899. It was an international arbitration, and it pushed for peace and disarmament of all countries and states. The Permanent Court of Arbitration in 1900. It institutionalized the law and practice of arbitration among countries. And finally, drafting the Statute of Permanent Court of International Justice in the 1910s. States should adopt a draft convention from the creation of Court of Arbitrary Justice. Fundamental ideas of PCA, or Perm Count of Arbitration.
Another major key advancement was the World Food Program. But to see how it was created, we have to go all the way back to the period 1760 to 1840, the Industrial Revolution. The Industrial Revolution began in Britain, and it spread through interactions because of global trade. With Britain exporting manufactured goods to other countries through the use of new technologies because of industrialization, people from these countries adopted their technologies, which accelerated industrialization. With increased industrialization came increased urban living. People in industrialized countries flocked to urban cities looking for jobs. But with bad living conditions, close living, and poor health management came the spread of disease between people. Diseases and epidemics also led to famine. For example, the Spanish flu spread from seaports and urban living and caused famine in multiple parts of the world because it would kill the people working on the farms who would produce the food. With World War II coming to an end, many countries started to run out of food, which some say is a big cause of why World War II ended, because the countries who were fighting had no food to provide for their soldiers or for their civilians. And because of this global interaction of World War II, and after it, countries were left starving, especially former colonized countries, because their resources were completely used up in World War II. The World Food Program was meant to prevent famine and world hunger ever since the UN was created. But this was very different from before, because the World Food Program was a huge global connection between all countries. Its main goal was to send aid and food to any country in need, and this was very different from before, because there was never any organization which's whole purpose was to support other countries with food, which ideally made this a huge advancement in global connections.
The League of Nations, founded on January 10, 1920. The founding members were the United Kingdom, Australia, Canada, India, New Zealand, and South Africa. The League of Nations was the first worldwide intergovernmental organization whose principal mission was to maintain world peace, but failed from the economic depression, renewed nationalism, lack of power, and feeling of humiliation, particularly in Germany. All of these combined eventually led to the World War II and the end of the League of Nations. But events that led to the formation of the League of Nations started with the Peace of Westphalia in 1648. The Peace of Westphalia ended the 30 and 80-year war and established the principle of state sovereignty in Europe. It recognized the right to each state to manage its own affairs without interference from another state. It was also the precursor to the idea of national self-determination. The treaty created the framework for modern international relations. The concepts of state sovereignty, mediation between nations, and diplomacy all find origin in this text. The Enlightenment in the 18th century. The Enlightenment was an intellectual movement which emphasized reason, science, and individual freedom. It contributed to the development of new ideas about government and the role of the state. It also inspired the growth of internationalism and the idea of a world community. The Industrial Revolution, late 18th and early 19th century. The Industrial Revolution was a time period when products and goods began to be mass-produced through factories. From the growth in technologies, it led to the growth in international relationships and trade. It caused countries to cooperate with one another for a financial gain for both. The Congress of Vienna, in 1814. The Conference of European Powers sought to restore stability and balance of a power after the First Napoleonic War. It established a system of international relations that relied on diplomacy and alliances, rather than military force to maintain peace. Its main goal was to provide a long-term peace plan for Europe by settling critical issues arising from the French Revolutionary Wars and the Napoleonic War through negotiation. The Hague Convention, in 1899 and 1907. The Hague Convention established rules of the conduct of warfare, including the treatment of POWs and the use of certain types of weapons. It created the Permanent Court of Arbitration, which provided a forum for peace resolutions of disputes between states. It stands as a symbol for the restrictions of war and avoiding it altogether. The First World War, from 1914 to 1918. With so many deaths, the entire world came to an agreement that there needs to be a way to prevent it from happening again. It convinced many for the need for a new international organization to promote peace and prevent future conflicts. The League of Nations was established in the aftermath of the war with the goal of preventing another global conflict.